Picture this, it's February 2012. Carlos Ghosn, the legendary CEO who turned around Nissan and saved Renault from bankruptcy, stands next to King Mohammed VI of Morocco at the opening of a massive factory outside Tanger. Back in France, politicians are losing their minds. The far right is calling it a real scandal. Union leaders are furious. Former cabinet ministers are screaming about social dumping. The French media is in full meltdown mode. And what's Ghosn doing? He's betting Morocco will become one of the world's automotive superpowers, a country with almost zero automotive history, a country still recovering from being one of the poorest regions on Earth just decades earlier. Fast forward to today, Morocco is now the European Union's #1 automotive exporter, not Germany, not France, Morocco. The country produces over 600,000 vehicles annually, ships $14 billion worth of cars to Europe, and controls supply chains that make European automakers sweat. Morocco didn't just prove Ghosn makers sweat. Morocco didn't just prove Ghosn right. They turned automotive manufacturing into a weapon. But here's what's truly insane. Cars are just one piece of the puzzle. Morocco also controls 70% of the world's phosphate reserves, built Africa's largest port, leads the continent's renewable energy revolution, and positioned itself as the bridge between Europe and Africa that everyone has to cross. All of this without a single drop of oil, without gas, without the black gold that made its neighbors rich. So how did Morocco pull this off? And more importantly, how is this tiny North African kingdom quietly building an empire that could reshape global trade for the next century? This is that story. Rewind to 1960. Morocco has just gained independence from France 4 years earlier. The country is desperately poor, the economy is almost entirely agricultural, infrastructure barely exists. In Casablanca, Morocco's economic heart, you can count the paved roads on one hand. Literacy rates hover around 15%. Average life expectancy is 47 years. The population is 11.6 million people, and most of them are struggling to survive. But there's one thing Morocco has that nobody else can replicate: geography. Stand at the northern tip of Morocco and look across the Strait of Gibraltar. Spain is 14 kilometers away. You can see Europe from Africa with your naked eyes. For centuries, this should have made Morocco rich. The country sits at the exact intersection of Europe, Africa, and the Mediterranean. It's the ultimate gateway, the perfect crossroads. But potential means nothing without execution. And for most of its modern history, Morocco had the location but not the infrastructure to exploit it. The country was like someone living in $1 million house they couldn't afford to maintain. That changed in 1999 when King Mohammed VI ascended to the throne. He was 36 years old, young, Western educated, and he looked at Morocco's geography and saw something his predecessors hadn't fully grasped. Location is only an advantage if you build the roads, ports, and systems to capitalize on it. So he made a decision that seemed borderline insane at the time. He decided to bet Morocco's entire future on becoming the logistics hub that connects 3 continents. In 2007, Morocco inaugurated Tanger Med, a massive port complex located 40 kilometers east of Tangier, directly facing the Strait of Gibraltar. The timing couldn't have been worse. The global financial crisis was about to explode. Credit markets were freezing, trade was collapsing, and Morocco was pouring billions into a megaport that critics said would sit empty. They were spectacularly wrong. Today, Tanger Med is the largest container port in Africa, handling over 9 million TEUs annually. That's 20-foot equivalent units, the standard measure for shipping containers. The port now ranks 17th globally, ahead of Hamburg, ahead of major European competitors that have been operating for centuries. But the real genius wasn't just building a port. It was understanding what the port unlocked. Tanger Med handles more than 40% of all transshipment traffic to Africa. Ships from Asia heading to West Africa, they stop at Tanger Med. Cargo from Europe going south, Tanger Med. The port connects Morocco to 186 ports in 77 countries across 5 continents. It's 18 meters deep throughout, allowing it to accommodate the world's largest vessels, ships 400 meters long carrying 22,000 containers. Morocco didn't just build a port, they built a choke point. And once you control a choke point, you control everything that flows through it. Over 1,000 companies now operate from Tanger Med's free trade zones, exporting more than $8.8 billion annually. DHL, DB Schenker, CEVA, Nippon Express, Emirates Logistics, all the major global logistics operators have facilities here. When you ship something from Asia to Africa or Europe to Africa, there's a decent chance it touches Moroccan soil. Morocco had turned 14 kilometers of water into a permanent competitive advantage. But a port alone doesn't make you a superpower. You need industries that feed the port. You need exports that justify the infrastructure. And that's where things get interesting, because while the port was being built, Morocco made another bet that seemed absolutely insane. It's 2007. Renault CEO Carlos Ghosn is looking for a location to build a massive low-cost vehicle manufacturing plant. He's already rescued Nissan from bankruptcy, slashed costs at Renault, and earned the nickname Le Cost Killer for his ruthless efficiency. Now he's hunting for a country that can produce cars cheaply enough to compete with Eastern Europe and Asia. Morocco makes 0 cents on paper. The country has almost no automotive history, no supplier ecosystem, no trained workforce. Most Moroccan workers have never seen the inside of a modern factory, let alone build a car. But Morocco has 3 things: proximity to Europe, cheap labour, and a government willing to throw everything at making this work. In September 2007, Carlos Ghosn and King Mohammed VI signed a memorandum of understanding to build a 400,000 capacity factory in Tanger. Planned investment, €600 million. Expected jobs, 6,000 direct, 30,000 indirect. Target, 90% of production exported to Europe. Back in France, the announcement triggered a political firestorm. This was 2007, remember, right before the financial crisis, when French unemployment was rising and industrial decline was a hot political topic. The idea that Renault, partially owned by the French state, was moving production to North Africa while French workers were losing jobs. Political poison. Union leaders called it social dumping. A former Sarkozy cabinet minister said it was dangerous and intolerable. The far-right National Front called it a real scandal. French media ran stories about Moroccan workers earning €250 per month compared to €1,800 for French factory workers. Ghosn didn't care. He saw the math. Labour costs in Morocco were half of Romania's. The Tanger plant was right next to the new megaport. Free trade agreements gave Moroccan-made cars duty-free access to European markets. And the Moroccan government was offering tax breaks, customs exemptions, and infrastructure support that France couldn't match. The factory opened in 2012. It was controversial, it was risky, and it changed everything. Because Renault's success triggered a feeding frenzy. Suddenly, every major automaker wanted a piece of Morocco. Peugeot arrived. Stellantis built a plant in Kenitra. Suppliers flooded in. Within a decade, Morocco had over 250 automotive companies serving 75 global export destinations. The numbers became absurd. By 2023, Morocco's automotive exports hit $13.9 billion, up 27% from the previous year. The country produced 535 1,825 vehicles, with roughly 80% destined for export. In 2024, Morocco displaced South Africa to become Africa's largest automotive manufacturer, producing about 614,000 cars. But here's the truly remarkable part. In terms of export value to the EU, Morocco now surpasses China. Read that again. Morocco exports more automotive value to Europe than China does, despite China's massive scale advantage. In 2023, Morocco shipped 536,000 vehicles to the EU worth $14 billion, compared to China's 782,000 vehicles. How? Morocco focused on high-value components and complete vehicles, not just cheap assembly. The country produces wiring systems worth $4.7 billion annually. Car construction and assembly components hit $6.7 billion. Powertrain systems exceeded $1.1 billion. The local integration rate, meaning components sourced within Morocco, has reached 60% and is targeting 80%. Morocco didn't become a factory for someone else's designs. They became an essential node in European automotive supply chains. And once you're essential, you're indispensable. The Moroccan government has set an ambitious target: 1 million vehicles annually by 2030. If achieved, this would catapult Morocco from the 24th largest automotive manufacturer globally to the 20th, putting it in the same league as Russia, Britain, and France, despite having a much smaller population. But while Morocco was building cars, they were also playing a different, longer game with a resource they'd controlled for a century. Phosphate. Here's a number that should make you sit up. Morocco controls approximately 70% of the world's phosphate reserves. Phosphate is the key ingredient in fertilizers. Fertilizers are essential for feeding the planet's growing population, and Morocco owns most of it. The OCP Group, Office Cherifiendes Phosphates, was founded in 1920 and has grown into the world's largest producer of phosphate and phosphate-based products. The company employs over 17,000 people and generated revenues of $9.76 billion in 2024. But OCP isn't just mining phosphate and shipping raw materials abroad. That's the mistake commodity exporters always make, selling cheap inputs instead of finished products. Morocco learned from the oil curse that destroyed its neighbours. Instead of exporting raw phosphate rock, Morocco built the Phosphate processing platform in 1984, which is now the world's largest phosphate fertilizer production complex. The transformation is remarkable. OCP produced approximately 30 million tons of phosphate rock in 2022, about 15% of global production. But Morocco's share of the global trade in finished phosphate products is around 31%. The company holds a market share of 49% in phosphoric acid production and 23% in the global fertilizer market. Morocco took a commodity and turned it into a value chain. Then they weaponized it for geopolitical influence. OCP has established subsidiaries and partnerships in countries including Ethiopia, Nigeria, Ghana, Rwanda, Senegal, and Tanzania. These aren't just commercial ventures. They're strategic relationships that give Morocco influence across the continent. The company's African expansion includes technical assistance, farmer training programs, and customized fertilizer solutions for local soil conditions. The OCP Foundation has created fertilization maps in 6 countries and reached over 4 million farmers, continent-wide. This is soft power through essential resources. Morocco isn't selling arms. They're not lending money with strings attached. They're helping African nations feed their populations, and in the process, building relationships that will last for generations. During the COVID-19 pandemic, OCP subsidiaries in Burkina Faso, Guinea, Madagascar, and Togo even pivoted to manufacturing protective equipment. When African governments needed help, Morocco was already there with infrastructure, relationships, and credibility. But Morocco knows phosphate won't last forever. So they launched a $13 billion green investment program for 2023 to 2027, committing to 100% renewable energy by 2027 and carbon neutrality by 2040. The company is investing heavily in green hydrogen and ammonia production, positioning itself for the post-fossil fuel future. Which brings us to Morocco's most audacious bet yet. Remember, Morocco has virtually no oil or gas. The country imports over 90% of its energy needs. This vulnerability could have been fatal. Instead, Morocco turned it into an opportunity. In 2009, Morocco launched its national energy strategy with an audacious goal: 42% of installed power capacity from renewables by 2020. They hit it. Then they raised the target: 52% renewable electricity by 2030. By 2030. The centerpiece is the Noor Werazazati Solar Complex, one of the largest solar power plants in the world. Located in the Moroccan desert where the sun beats down relentlessly, the complex uses concentrated solar power technology that stores energy for use even after sunset. With a capacity of 580 MW spread across 4 plants covering 3,000 hectares, Noor Werazazati isn't just a power plant. It's a monument to Morocco's renewable ambitions. But solar is just the beginning. Morocco's 13,500-kilometer coastline provides exceptional wind resources. The Tarfaya wind farm generates over 300 megawatts. Total wind capacity reached 1.43 GW by 2022, positioning Morocco as the second largest wind energy producer in Africa after South Africa. Add in 1.77 GW hydropower capacity, and Morocco's total renewable energy capacity now exceeds 4 GW, representing 38% of total installed electrical capacity. And the pipeline is massive. Morocco is currently developing the X-Links project, a $20 billion mega-project that will build 8 GW of solar power and 3.5 GW of wind power connected to the UK via a 3,800-kilometer subsea cable. If completed by 2030, it will supply approximately 8% of the UK's power demand. This isn't just renewable energy. It's renewable energy export at scale. Another major development, TotalEnergies is building a $10 billion green ammonia plant powered by dedicated 5 GW wind and 5 GW solar facilities. The combination of constant daytime sun and nighttime winds will provide nearly 24/7 renewable power. Why does all this matter? Because Morocco is positioning itself as Europe's renewable energy supplier. The same geographic proximity that makes Morocco perfect for automotive exports makes it perfect for green energy exports. European nations desperate to reduce carbon emissions and diversify away from Russian gas are looking at Morocco's endless sunshine and seeing a solution. And Morocco isn't waiting for permission. They're building the infrastructure now, securing the partnerships now, positioning themselves as indispensable now. By the time Europe fully commits to renewable energy imports, Morocco will already be operational at scale. Now, Morocco's economic transformation isn't just about what they produce, it's about who they can sell to. And on this front, Morocco has been playing diplomatic chess, while others were playing checkers. Morocco has secured 55 free trade agreements, providing preferential access to nearly 1 billion consumers. This includes agreements with the European Union, the United States, the European Free Trade Association, the United Arab Emirates, and Turkey. Add in preferential trade arrangements with 62 additional countries, and Morocco has built one of the most extensive free trade networks on the planet. The EU-Morocco Association Agreement essentially creates a free trade area between Morocco and Europe's massive consumer market. For a country 14 kilometers from Spain, this is transformative. Moroccan goods enter European markets with minimal tariffs. The 2004 Free Trade Agreement with the United States gives Moroccan exporters preferential access to the world's largest economy, while attracting American companies to use Morocco as a manufacturing base for global markets. These agreements explain why 56% of Morocco's exports go to the EU, and why major multinational corporations have set up operations in Moroccan free trade zones. Companies aren't just accessing Moroccan labor, they're accessing Moroccan trade agreements that unlock global markets. Morocco has turned geography into access, and access into power. But let's be honest about the challenges, because this isn't a perfect success story. Unemployment remains stubbornly high at 13%. Youth unemployment sits at a devastating 35.8%. Fresh university graduates face an unemployment rate of 19.7%. The economy has added jobs, about 162,000 in 2024, but population growth has outpaced employment growth. Over the past decade, the working-age population increased by 10%, while employment rose by only 1.5%. And then there's water. Or rather, the lack of it. Morocco is facing one of the worst droughts in its history. 2023 was the driest year in 8 decades, with total rainfall nearly 48% below the national average. The 6-year period from 2019 to 2024 represents the longest recorded sequence of consecutive drought years, with an average rainfall deficit of 35%. In 2022, Morocco's dams were at just 33% capacity. Some key reservoirs, like Al Masira, dropped to nearly 1% capacity at the start of 2024. This isn't a temporary dry spell, this is a structural crisis. Walk through the Dardes Valley in southeastern Morocco and you'll see empty riverbeds where rivers used to flow. Youssef, a farmer who returned from France to grow olives and almonds, tells a heartbreaking story. When I was a child, I used to swim in this river. There was incredible fish diversity. Today, half a century later, my valley is completely dry. The numbers are terrifying. Morocco currently has just 645 cubic meters of renewable water resources per person per year, compared to 10,000 in water-rich countries. That number is projected to drop to 500 cubic meters by 2050, pushing Morocco into extreme water stress. Some projections suggest Morocco could lose 80% of its water resources by 2045 if current consumption patterns continue. Agriculture, which employs 35% of the workforce and uses 84% of the country's water, is getting crushed. The 2022 drought caused agricultural GDP to contract sharply. Entire harvests were lost. Meat prices soared. The government had to quintuple livestock imports and suspend customs duties to stabilize the market. Morocco's response: massive investment in desalination. The country is building what will be the world's largest desalination plant in Casablanca, producing 300 million cubic meters of water per year when operational in 2027. Other plants in Layun, Agadir, Safi, and Dakhla are already working or about to start. Total investment in desalination, $12.6 billion by 2027. Morocco has also invested 15 million euros in cloud seeding programs between 2021 and 2023, which increased rainfall by an estimated 4% and boosted agricultural yields by up to 20%. The water crisis is real, existential, and worsening. But Morocco is treating it like they treated energy dependence, as a problem to engineer around rather than accept. But Morocco isn't waiting to solve every domestic problem before expanding regionally. They're using regional expansion to drive domestic growth. Morocco's return to the African Union in 2017, after a 33-year absence, marked a strategic pivot. The country isn't just looking north to Europe. It's looking south to Africa's 1.4 billion people and rapidly growing consumer markets. From 2008 to 2015, two-thirds of Morocco's foreign direct investment flowed into African countries, totaling approximately $1.6 billion. Major Moroccan banks now operate across Francophone Africa. Moroccan telecom companies have established operations in several African nations. And of course, there's phosphate diplomacy through OCP. Morocco is positioning itself as Africa's gateway to Europe and vice versa. The country's advanced infrastructure, stable institutions, and extensive trade agreements make it an ideal hub for European companies wanting to do business in Africa and for African companies wanting to access European markets. This isn't charity, it's cold strategic calculation. By becoming indispensable to African agricultural production, digital connectivity, and financial services, Morocco creates a sphere of influence that extends far beyond its borders. Now, no discussion of Morocco's economic rise would be complete without mentioning China. The relationship is complex, competitive, and increasingly important. China has become a major investor in Moroccan infrastructure. Chinese companies have financed and built the Casablanca-Rabat high-speed rail line, sections of the Nor Ouarzazate solar complex, expansions of the Kenitra Atlantic port, and various industrial parks. For China, Morocco represents a strategic foothold in North Africa and a gateway to European and African markets. For Morocco, Chinese investment brings capital, expertise, and speed of execution, but this creates a delicate balance. Morocco wants Chinese investment and technology, but it also wants to maintain strong relationships with the United States and Europe. The country has managed this tightrope fairly well, accepting Chinese infrastructure investment while maintaining security cooperation with the United States and economic integration with Europe. The United States maintains significant military presence in Morocco, using it as a strategic partner for North African operations. Morocco's balancing act, taking Chinese money while maintaining Western security ties, is similar to what many developing nations attempt. Few execute it as successfully. So where does Morocco go from here? The country has set ambitious targets for the next decade. 1 million vehicles produced annually by 2030. 52% of electricity from renewable sources by 2030. Phosphate processing capacity increased from 12 million tons to 20 million tons of fertilizer annually by 2027. Major investment in green hydrogen and green ammonia production. Continued expansion of Tanger Med and development of other ports. The common thread: Morocco is systematically building the infrastructure, relationships, and capabilities required to be indispensable to multiple critical global supply chains simultaneously. Let's zoom out and look at what Morocco has actually accomplished. In roughly 2 decades, a country with no oil, no gas, and limited natural resources beyond phosphate has built Africa's largest port and turned it into a top 20 global facility. Become the EU's #1 automotive exporter by value, surpassing China. Positioned itself as the world's dominant phosphate and fertilizer producer with strategic influence across Africa. Launched one of the world's most ambitious renewable energy transformations. Secured preferential trade access to nearly 1 billion consumers. Attracted massive foreign investment from Europe, America, and China simultaneously. This didn't happen by accident. Morocco's transformation is the result of strategic vision executed consistently over decades. First, they exploited their geographic advantage ruthlessly. Being 14 kilometers from Europe is only valuable if you build the infrastructure to connect. Morocco built the ports, highways, rail lines, and free trade zones to turn proximity into profit. Second, they diversified intelligently. Instead of betting everything on one sector, Morocco built simultaneous strengths in automotive, phosphates, logistics, renewable energy, and agriculture. This diversification creates resilience. Third, they thought long-term. The investments in Tanger Med, renewable energy, and automotive didn't pay off immediately. They required years of patient capital deployment, but Morocco's leadership maintained focus even when short-term returns were uncertain. Fourth, they made themselves indispensable. Morocco didn't just build industries, they built dependencies. European automakers now depend on Moroccan production, African agriculture depends on Moroccan fertilizer. Global shipping depends on Tanger Med's efficiency. By becoming critical to other supply chains, Morocco created strategic leverage far beyond its size. Fifth, they balanced relationships masterfully. Morocco maintained security ties with the United States, economic integration with Europe, strategic partnerships with Gulf states, and growing connections with China, all while expanding influence across Africa. Sixth, they learned from others' mistakes. Morocco watched oil-rich neighbors squander resource wealth on consumption rather than investment. They studied Asian manufacturing hubs and copied successful industrial policies. They observed European renewable energy transitions and positioned themselves early. But perhaps the most important insight is this. Morocco recognized that in the 21st century global economy, geographic advantages matter less than strategic positioning. Yes, being close to Europe helps, but plenty of countries near Europe aren't economic success stories. What matters is building the infrastructure, skills, institutions, and relationships that turn geographic potential into economic reality. Morocco still faces significant challenges. Unemployment remains high. Climate change threatens agricultural stability. The water crisis is existential. Regional political tensions create ongoing uncertainty. Inequality and poverty persist despite economic growth. But the trajectory is clear. Morocco is building the foundations of a modern, diversified economy that can adapt to changing global conditions. They're not just reacting to opportunities, they're systematically creating them. The question isn't whether Morocco will become a regional economic superpower. In many ways, they already are. The question is how far this momentum can carry them, and whether they can translate economic power into improved living standards for all Moroccans, not just the connected elite. If you're looking for a case study in strategic economic development, how to build a competitive, modern economy without natural resource windfalls, Morocco is the textbook. They took a middling position and turned it into a critical node in global supply chains. They took geographic proximity and turned it into industrial might. They took phosphate reserves and turned them into continental influence. The story of Morocco's economic rise isn't finished. It's just getting interesting. And if their past 2 decades are any indication, the next 2 decades will see Morocco cement its position as one of Africa's undisputed economic leaders, a country that proved you don't need oil to build a powerful, resilient, modern economy. We just need vision, patience, infrastructure, and the ruthless determination to make yourself indispensable to the world.